Itmar, it's that man again. Hello. And this week, and I don't want you to run for cover because some of you will, we're going to do some more sugar tongs. Oh, the joy in all your gleaming faces as I say that. But they're interesting. The one pair is a type of sugar tong that I didn't get to in the sugar tong epic that I did a few months ago. And they're both unusual because they are both from Birmingham. Now, you're going to think, a lot of you, I'm cracked in the head, because you can go out and you can basically, within 6 paces, you can find a pair of Birmingham hallmark sugar tongs. And you absolutely can. There are not hundreds, but thousands of the buggers from the late 19th century into the 20th century. Birmingham, the industrial hub of the world for a period, absolutely churned these things out and assayed thousands, tens of thousands, probably, if we counted them all up, if we could be bothered, hundreds of thousands of them strewn across the globe. There's a little bit of Birmingham wherever you go. But go back to the beginning of the assay office in 1773, and there weren't that many people making sugar tongs in Birmingham at all. The business of making sugar tongs, which appears in York, particularly in the West Country, in London, produced in such vast numbers that there wasn't really the need to produce them in Birmingham. There wasn't the demand. They could easily be bought in from London. And also there wasn't necessarily the skill set. It's a different skill set and setup for making flatware, which they had already for years and years and years in Sheffield and London for centuries. Sheffield, again, actually, Hallamshire flatware and cutlery goes back many, many hundreds of years. Birmingham less so. Birmingham was the toy shop of the world in the 1770s, and it was full of box makers. And if you found a specialist box maker today and you said, I'd like you to make me some hand-forged spoons, he would collapse from horror, because it's a different skill set. It's all about hinge making, about soldering, cutting, rolling, engraving, piercing, whereas hand-forging a spoon, hand-forging a pair of tongs is a completely different skill set. Lots of silversmiths can do both, don't get me wrong, and did in provincial centres, but Birmingham specialised in small work. So to find the very few pairs that were made on rare occasions when somebody insisted, it is quite a big thing. So from 1773, and I would say certainly up until the 1840s, you will be very hard pressed to find a pair of Birmingham assayed sugar tongs. They do appear largely by a firm of Adams and Company that were working in Walsall, but there were other makers, and sometimes, occasionally, you will be very lucky and you'll find a pair by the great man himself, Matthew Bolton. Because again, even with his huge manufactory, the biggest factory in the world when it was built, producing all manner of silver and silver-plated items, sugar tongs by Bolton, incredibly rare. So let's get on to what I found. Now, this was the first pair, which I was delighted to find. They are rather lovely, I think you'll agree. Little acorn, stylised acorn bowls, and bright cut engraved all the way down the edge, and then this very bold diamond. It's a very bold design. And then this sort of odd dental work, which I haven't really seen before. And that isn't engraved, that's all produced with a punch. So again, that's probably the same punch that they used to, meticulously punch out little decorative borders on snuff boxes. So there's an overlap, nicely initialed. And what you will get, if you're lucky enough to find an early pair of Birmingham tongs, unlike a lot of London tongs of the period, you will get a date letter. So we can look at this, and we've got the Birmingham town mark, the standard mark. We're too early for a duty mark, So we've got the maker's mark and the date letter. And the date letter in this case is for 1782. So it is within the first 10 years of the establishment of the Birmingham Assay Office. And rather surprisingly, they are by the very well-known box maker. And lots of you that collect small silver will have objects by this maker, Samuel Pemberton. And it's his very early mark, which you don't see that often. It's a Gothic SP, very elaborate, very beautifully cut. Most of you that have got snuff boxes and nutmeg graters and vinaigrettes by Pemberton will just have a plain SP punch, which comes in a little bit later. But these are very early Pemberton tongs. If they have a flaw, sadly, some idiot has bent them and creased them. And you get all sorts of damage on sugar tongs. It's just best to explain what some of them are. Often you will get a break. So an arm has come off, someone has bent it, twisted it, and it's fallen off. That will be soldered back on. You will either get a solder mark or you'll get a plate of silver set in and basically joining the two together with some solder. It will be very visible. When we talk about a crease, it's basically the arm has bent severely back and then been put back into place. It hasn't cracked, it hasn't come off, but you get that mark, a bit like folding a crisp banknote very firmly and then flattening it out again. It's not in two pieces, but you can see the line. So that's a crease. So it's not as bad as the arm falling off, thank goodness. And it's only visible, which is a joy as well, only visible on the inside. But they're very, very rare things. Very occasionally will you find a pair, an early pair of Birmingham silver sugar tongs. However, they are not the rarest. There's one other pair that I bought at about the same time, not that long ago. You know, these things are like buses. You wait for years and then two come along at once. But these are fascinating. If you think those were interesting, and you probably don't, but these are fascinating. These are a type we haven't looked at before because I didn't have them to show you. These are sprung sugar tongs. And here, the arms are cast. That whole arm is cast. So you can cast that quite quickly. But the skill is in the making of this hinge because it is, and amazingly it still works, a lot of them don't, it is sprung. And the skill here is all about being able to make that sprung box hinge. Now these are remarkable because they are marked for the partnership, that first early partnership of Matthew Bolton and John Fothergill. Anything by Bolton and Fothergill is uncommon. Lots of forms like egg cups. You tend to see egg cups because they made egg frames. You tend to see some flatware. You see lots of candlesticks. You rarely, if ever at all, see sugar tongs. Now, what's funny about these is I did show them to a friend, and he said, well, maybe Bolton didn't make these. Maybe he bought them in. And I thought, well, Bolton doesn't buy anything in. He does it as a matter of principle. Even when he gets orders for fanciful pairs of candlesticks, he goes to the cost and expense of making the tools and the patterns to make a pair, rather than the much cheaper option, which would have been to go to London and said to a working silversmith, just make me a pair to this pattern and I'll assay them. That would have been the clever way to do it, but he was principled. Or so I thought. Because when my friend suggested this, I had a really good look, because they're marked, curiously, they're marked with full marks on both arms, which was unnecessary. You didn't need to do that, but a full set of early punches for 1777, so these are in the first 5 years of the Assay Office. 1777, but on each arm. Now, one set of marks are absolutely clean and clear, but the other, the M in the MB for Matthew Bolton, is overstriking something else. And the big joy is you can see what it is. Now, there were 2 or 3 specialist makers of these tongs in London. One is a goldsmith with the maker's mark IH with a little bump over it, and various people think that's various different silversmiths, but it's just basically silversmith IH with a little bump. The other manufacturer, well known and identified, is William Booth and John Booth. They specialised in these sprung tongs and also larger sprung servers, but they made the hinges. That's the key thing. And what you can see under the M is a W. And this means that these are London-made sprung tongs by William Booth, but Matthew Bolton. Matthew Bolton he saw it, he gave up. He thought, I'm not making a pair of those. And they were supplied to Bolton and overstruck by him. And that's very interesting because Bolton did not like buying anything in. He really didn't. So they apart from being just fabulously rare things, and they are fabulously rare things, early Birmingham sprung tongs, you might never see another pair of these, quite honestly. But beyond that, they actually prove that Matthew Bolton, on occasion, bought a bit of London silver, which is, absolutely remarkable. But then why go to all the added expense of setting up a little part of your factory just to make these hinges, when I think I've seen one other pair like this, one other sprung pair by Bolton, and that's in a long time of looking at a lot of collections. So he evidently didn't make them in large numbers, or they would have survived in some shape or form, even with breaks, damages or repairs. So that's incredibly rare. Look out for early Birmingham tongs. Remember, if they're before about 1840 or 1850, they're rare. If they're 18th century, if they're pre-1800, they are extremely rare. There are probably 40 or 50 pairs known in collections, various collections, and you will be lucky if, after watching this, if you go and look for a pair for maybe 6 months, you'll be lucky to find them. So to buy both of these barely a week apart was a miracle. But miracles do happen. Dreams can come true. It can happen to you, although I hope it happens to me instead. And it does. Anyway, that's enough. I promise no more tea tongs or sugar tongs for a little while now. I know you're probably all sick of them, but we will return. There will be, I know it because I look for these things, there will be another interesting pair in the future. But until then, good antiques hunting and goodbye.